All right, everybody, we're going to get started. I'm going to go ahead and just start trying to talk over everybody and hope that everybody finds a seat here quick. Good morning. I'm Jill Lamoureux. I'm the Director of Government Relations for Can Labs. I've been around the marijuana block a few times, and I've watched a lot unfold with Infused products. I want to first of all thank NCIA and the board that works so hard to keep it going, and all of you for coming today. The title of this session is Preparing for the Regulatory Future of Infused Products in America. And I think next year we're actually going to say internationally, because we have Canada and Uruguay and Australia interested, and we see tons of movement. So I wanted to kind of start off, because as we all learned in history class, you learn about the future by studying the past. So I'm going to give you a little primer on infused product regulation. So once upon a time, in a land far, far away, known as Denver, and for those of us from Denver, it is very far away. In May 2010, our legislators, in their infinite wisdom, decided they were going to start regulating cannabis sales. And I'm pretty sure it was the first definition of infused product in legislation anywhere in the country. And they also mandated the creation of the first set of rules around infused products. Back then, I was actually privileged to be the second chair of NCIA, and I think at that time in 2010 we had maybe 50 members, and we're tipping, I think I heard 1,000 today, so congratulations to Aaron and NCIA. It's just incredible. Good work, you guys. Back then, we also could not even imagine a half a day devoted to infused products, let alone a 3-day seminar. This is pretty incredible. You know, infused products back in 2010 were probably about 5% of sales total, and now they're 50% of sales. That's in 4 years. So where we're going to be in the next 4 years just blows my mind. One of the things, so there's a few things. The first regulation on infused products was really kind of simple. Now to us it was like 62 pages all in all, and we were very overwhelmed. And what we see now is just leaps and bounds ahead of that. But so for our first set of infused product rules, we had a few things. First, the Marijuana Enforcement Division, which here is the Department of Revenue, which happens to know nothing about food, safety, sanitation, or health, gets to write these rules. And so the legislator said, we need sanitation rules, what I call the wash your hands rule, because it was about as simple as that. Have hot water, wash your hands, don't touch food after going to the bathroom. That was the extent of the rules. A kitchen that produced any kind of normal food product, meaning non-medicated, you couldn't rent it. So a lot of infused products manufacturers at the time were renting commercial kitchens, so they had to go out and invest in their own kitchens at that point. And another thing is that manufacturers needed a contract with a cultivator to be able to make products. And not only that, if you were lucky enough to have your own grow license, you couldn't actually sell the flower. So, you know, the industry that had the smallest margins ever is continually getting kind of crushed by these regulations. But not only did you have to contract, so you needed a cultivator's permission to actually operate your business, but you had to guess how many products you were going to get out of that garbage bag full of usually pretty crappy trim. So it was just kind of a cluster, and everybody was confused, but everybody went along with it at that point. And there was also a rule that you couldn't use more than 5 people's product in one batch of edibles. And this was like an attempt at a recall procedure, yet there was no rules around recall. So you could put 5 people's stuff in there, but if someone got sick, I don't know which one of the 5, I don't know who to call, I don't know what to do. There was no regs around it. So it was definitely a start, but it was a meek start. The only labeling requirements back then were something like, this product may be toxic and kill you, and it might be 1 times or 2 times dose, or my favorite, the XXX dose. And back then there was no mandatory potency testing, so XXX could mean 10 milligrams, or it could be none, or it could mean 1,000. So people were, like, buyer beware was definitely, at that point, the rule of the game. And so, you know, infused products have really kind of been the punching bag of the regulators, and you see that here today. Just, we had a movement to ban all edibles. It failed very quickly, but the fact that we're even still talking about that is pretty important when we look at the regulatory future. And so this punching bag mentality seems to continue today, where we have some of the most complex regulations. So Tripp had mentioned the 82 pages of emergency rules that are mostly surrounded, you know, centered on infused products. So there needs to be industrial hygienists now and process validation. In 2010, I think the farm had bought one of the first CO2 extraction machines in the state. And now we have rules for UL listing, commercial hoods, ventilation. Back then, local health inspectors had no idea what to do. You know, you kind of had to talk them into passing you and your extraction equipment and just be like, it's okay, don't look over there, just let's keep walking this way. And so as each state issues new regulations, we see more and more what in other industries they would call best management practice or good manufacturing practice actually set and rule, which is pretty interesting, and it's not something we see. So as we go, these regulations don't get easier and more manageable, they just get more added on and added on. So if you look at, you know, one set of rules, you're like, oh, there's Canada's rule, there's Illinois' rule, there's Nevada's rule. Are we gonna take any out, or are we just gonna keep adding them? So it's gonna be a continual struggle. And operators, you know, it's funny because the pushback against edibles has been on potency and dosing, but the things that can really harm the public, like microbial contamination, there's barely any testing for that, and our operators have been really, really, really responsible to date. We have not seen any health scares or public health crises, but that's what's really gonna roll us back, and so that's what we need to be focused on going forward. So our panelists are a very healthy mix of Colorado, well, it's like boy, girl, Colorado, Washington. So we have mixed representation, but we're at a high school dance here. So, or actually junior high dance. But they're gonna bring points of view from, you know, the two retail states, adult use, tax and regulate states, but both with a medical tradition. Washington's never quite state regulated the way Colorado's was, and so that really lends to how these are unavailing in each jurisdiction. So Jordan's gonna first discuss where he sees the future of regulation heading for infused products, and then Stisha is going to discuss the existing models and how they can be used as a platform going forward for new states. Mark's gonna talk about how to actually incorporate regulation into your SOPs for effective management, and then Hillary's gonna wrap it up with a discussion on product liability, which is really why this all exists, is, you know, the liability and keeping people healthy. So I'm gonna go through all the introductions right now up front and then have people come up. So Jordan Wellington is an associate at Vicente Cederberg. He comes from a wide range of regulatory background. He actually helped craft the regulations in 2013 for the retail space, so if you're mad, talk to Jordan. No, I'm kidding. They did a great job, and there's so many stakeholders. I mean, that's, I think, what a lot of people don't understand is we're in a room of advocates and people with the same goal. But when you get under the Golden Dome, the number of stakeholders increases exponentially. So when you look at rules and go, this is ridiculous, it's because 50 people had their hands in there. And so you can really tell when reading regs like who you're appeasing at that point. And then Stisha's from Washington, and she's the Director of Operations for Green Chief and Baked Botanicals. She has a long history in restaurant management and food safety, and so she's bringing that now to cannabis. And then Mark Slaw has been around Colorado for years, mainly down in Colorado Springs. He has been focused with his company, I Comply, on helping operators kind of deal with all of these new regulatory shifts, which again is especially difficult for infused products. And then Hillary Bricken heads up the Canna Law Group in Washington. It's a practice group of, although she's licensed in several states. It's a practice group of Harris Moore, and she's been representing cannabis companies since 2010, and she helps with intellectual property issues and all of these new and exciting expanding fields that we are seeing coming on with regulation. So we'll start with Jordan.
Hi, everybody. Jill's right. You can probably blame me for a lot of the trouble you're having if you operate in Colorado. I work at Vicente Cederberg. I'm an associate there. I run our compliance department, and I also do a lot of public policy work here in Colorado and across the country on marijuana legalization and regulation. Before that, I worked for Colorado's Marijuana Enforcement Division as their sole policy analyst and ran all of our working groups and wrote a chunk of the rules, including a lot of the stuff that was outside of the law enforcement expertise. The Marijuana Enforcement Division is obviously a law enforcement entity that regulates the marijuana industry. So when we started getting into concentrate production and testing and edible products, a lot of that stuff ended up falling to me. So if you dislike that stuff, you can definitely complain to me afterwards. But I think a lot of the stuff that Jill touched on, at least in terms of where we were, is important to understand both where we're going, especially in new states that come online, because we expect that some new states will go through some of the same troubles we've had here in Colorado, but it's also important to kind of understand where we're going. Historically, what I like to say is that edible marijuana products have been slowly more and more regulated, and the areas of regulation that people are shockingly starting to care about now are really consumer safety and employee safety, and so I want to touch on those issues, and that's definitely the sanitary stuff that we've been talking about. In the medical world, what was amazing is we've got immunocompromised patients, people who are really, really sick that we're providing medicine to, and the health and sanitary standards were not only secondary, but in a lot of ways disregarded. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment has been insistent that edible marijuana products should not be treated under the law like food. Edible marijuana products are explicitly exempted from the definition of food in Colorado, and I've had arguments with people in the state about how concerns about health and sanitary problems within edible marijuana products was literally me searching for a problem, and because I had found a solution and there was actually no problem, that you couldn't possibly get sick from a marijuana infused product. Regular brownie totally needs to be inspected and oversight. Once you infuse marijuana there, completely safe to the consumer, except for the marijuana in there, which is the devil, and all of these other things. So it's been a very interesting road to hoe, but I think what we've gotten is some real buy-in here, and we're seeing more and more kind of regulation going into these consumer safety pieces. So one aspect of that is the sanitary that we've been talking about, and we expect to see this going forward in other states. Things like mandatory testing for contaminants and things of that nature, and also regulation of the facilities, hopefully by real food inspectors and health departments. We're finally seeing it here in Denver, where the Denver Environmental Health Department is going in and inspecting kitchens that make marijuana food like they would other kitchens. This has definitely led to some really difficult fits and starts. There was the big botulism scare of 2014, which, nobody got botulism, so we're all safe, thank God. But, that was a really big deal. And so we're kind of learning with the local public health officials about where our concerns need to be about health and sanitary. But it's amazing that this is even happening. And as far as I know, it's really only happening in Denver. At least in Colorado. The rest of the local public health departments have been reluctant to inspect marijuana kitchens. One of the great excuses is because they're not armed, because I guess all the marijuana kitchens are going to try to shoot them if they don't have a gun when they come in. I don't really understand all of it, but there's another big public safety issue that's come up here that I want to spend some time touching on, because I think it's actually really fascinating and something that we're going to see potentially replicate itself over and over and over again in other states that transition from a medical to an adult use market, unless basically the people in this room and people like us get out in front of it. We can't let regulators solve this problem, and that's the problem of accidental over-ingestion, or the Maureen Dowd experience, if you guys want to make a joke about it. This is when someone means to eat edible marijuana products and just eats way too much and freaks out and has a really, really bad time. So there's two things that's really important to understand. One, why is this happening, and why did this happen here in Colorado? So this is actually a tale of markets and economics more than anything else. This is not a tale of regulation. The marijuana industry developed in Colorado, serving medical patients who, for the most part, were experienced marijuana consumers. And when they ate too much of an edible, they kind of recognized at least what was going on and would get through that experience. In addition, they had much stronger tolerances. And so the average medical product, I mean, you would see products 50, 60, 100 milligrams. I've talked to people that eat 500 milligrams and function totally fine. But then you have someone who could eat 10 milligrams of marijuana and almost lose it. So when we opened up retail, we took all of our medical products for experienced consumers and just shifted them right to the retail marketplace and figured those would be perfect. No one really thought, oh my God, we're dealing with an entirely new subset of consumers. Well, that's what we were doing. And so when the retail stores opened in Colorado and the medical products were shifted only with a 100 milligram cap over to the retail side, we started experiencing a lot of accidental over-ingestion. Everybody in Colorado knows somebody that's had this experience. We've written about it in the New York Times now too, which is interesting. But so what is that? That was not a regulatory issue. That was a market issue. That was businesses taking one set of practices that they developed for one specific subset of consumers and then applying those same practices to a larger pool of consumers that had dissimilar characteristics. In turn, what the businesses in Colorado have recognized is that there is a large number of people looking for low-dose products. That the potency war under the medical market, which is what we saw, edibles getting stronger and stronger and stronger, so it's like this war to create the most potent edible, was actually a disservice when we came to retail. It actually created products that were creating a bad experience for consumers. And I know this might sound crazy, but if you create a product that a consumer eats and has a bad time, he's not going to go back and buy your product. So the worst possible kind of marketing in the world to engage in is, here, eat my product and have a terrible time. And that's what a lot of these businesses, not intentionally, but basically by accident, was going on. And so what we've seen now is the marijuana-infused products manufacturers in Colorado have been producing low-dose products. Dixie Elixirs, you just saw Trip Talk, has come out with a product called Dixie One. We see this going on and on with a lot of other people producing low-dose products for the retail marketplace. And so this is one of these interesting things. I know I'm here to talk about regulation, and I can talk about some of the stuff that we've done very quickly because I already got a 5-minute sign, but it's not just regulation. Sometimes these are market-created problems, just like the accidental over-ingestion. The edibles market under medical drove potency up really, really, really high, and then all of a sudden retail consumers came in, businesses kept doing the same thing, and not creating new products for what was really a new market, not thinking about it that way. And I don't fault the businesses. Obviously, they had a million things going on in the transition. It's just something that we've learned and something that I hope when we bring retail marijuana to other states like Oregon and things like that, that this is understood and that we understand that we really need to appeal to a new type of consumer. And in doing that, we need to use a lot of low-dose products, especially when people begin consuming edible marijuana for the first time. Some of the other stuff really quickly that's been going on that I think we'll see, obviously, I don't think it's a new trend, but we've been seeing child-resistant packaging, obviously, all over the place. That is accidental ingestion, where you don't even mean to eat marijuana. It's usually kids. The numbers are really, really small, but obviously it's a massive political issue. I think we were at 8 last year at Denver Children's Hospital. We're up to 14 now over the year of children that have been admitted with accidental marijuana ingestion. What does that mean? That means that every place that I go and talk to, that's not a room like this, but a room full of people who are both friendly and opposed, I hear about the 80-fold increase in accidental ingestion of children of marijuana. Well, yeah, it's 6 people, but it is an 80-fold increase. And I don't control what they say on Fox News and in the newspaper, and they use the big number because that's what gets headlines. And so we have to understand that whether anyone's dying from this or not, the fact is accidental ingestion, accidental over-ingestion are problems for our industry. They're political problems that will result in even more regulation. Whether we agree with it or not, there was something that caused the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment to recommend that we ban all edibles. They're not going to get that, but that's a separate discussion. These aren't evil people like just sitting there, twiddling their thumbs, trying to find ways to ruin the marijuana people. They're like genuinely concerned, and whether their concerns are rational or not, their concerns are heard. Their concerns are replicated. It is not good for marijuana legalization anywhere for the public health department in Colorado to recommend banning edibles, because that gets read internationally, and then policymakers in other states read that and say, oh my God, if we legalize marijuana, we might need to ban it. So am I at 0 minutes? Probably at this point. All right, so I'm gonna wrap up since I probably took over time. Oh, there we go, I am at 0 minutes now. So big trends, I guess, really quickly. I think we're going to see a lot more concern about consumer safety, a lot more concern about employee safety. That was a lot of the concentrate regulation. But above all, think about what you're doing when you're marketing your products and you're creating your products, and understand both who your consumers are and the fact that your products are part of a much larger movement to legalize marijuana. They are not simply sold to somebody just so they can enjoy themselves or medicate themselves for whatever reason. That what you produce becomes part of the narrative of marijuana legalization, and people's reactions to those things become part of the narrative that people like me have to deal with as we try to grow this industry. So thank you all for your time.
Trade chips. Hello, my name is Stesha, by the way. I am a producer processor out of Washington. We have edibles on the market as well as various other ones. And right now in Washington, we've taken the completely opposite effect. We have gone super regulated. We have WSDA inspections before we're ever allowed to produce edibles. We have to go through an entire label process. Is anyone in here from Washington? Producer processors? So those of you who do know the regulations that came out on Friday, we have multiple regulations regarding where we are with edibles and infused products. We have to submit every label. We have to submit a picture of the product. We actually have to submit the recipe for WSDA approval. And if they're not done in your initial approval, you actually have to wait for that recipe to be approved before you can take it to market. One of the things I want to talk about is we have to look at what Colorado has done as well as what Washington has done and make that kind of a jumping point for the rest of legalization within the US. If we're going to have a truly consumer retail market, we have to look at what we've done well and what we've done bad and take those two together and go, okay, what can we do better in the next state? Colorado and Washington have taken such separate sides on how we've dealt with the recreational market. Washington, we're wishy-washy, let's be very frank with each other. We refuse to regulate our medical market, and so we decided to over-regulate our recreational market. As we move forward and everyone's talking about what we're doing in each state, we look at Colorado, we look at Washington, and we go, okay, what have they accomplished? What have they done? What have they done right? What have they done wrong? And all the people in the room, we need to get together and help set those regulations. We need to be the ones that are putting together to go, okay, you know what, we've looked at this, let's take this part, let's take that part. And with the regulations, as he was talking about, we get a lot back from media. It's not just a regulatory issue, especially on the child part of it, the accidental ingestion. We were the first person on the retail market with edibles in Washington. When we first brought them out, we brought them out in child-proof bags for, ASTM certified little locks, blah, 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 blah. And they've kind of moved the market to 4mm plastic, and now we have emergency regs going back out. Now every single serving size has to be packaged in the 4mm plastic, child-proof, non-perforated, non-easy tear, all those things. We've gone full circle again. Looking at that, looking at that, we can't make up our mind on what Washington wants for regulations. It's very, very hard to adapt from a producer-processor standpoint on what you're supposed to do when the regulations are changing every single moment. And the only way that we're going to get those regulations back together is to truly get everybody together and go, okay, let's look at what works. Let's look at what works for us as an industry from a recreational standpoint and a medical standpoint. Show of hands for those of you who saw the article come out for all the letters that Seattle sent out to our medical shops. We've sent out a letter that says become compliant or quit. There's no way to become compliant. We are not giving them options anymore. We're not giving them a chance to be in a regulated market. We're not giving them options, and we really have to. As we move forward with regulations, you hear it a lot at the board meetings at the LCB, well, Colorado did this, Colorado did that. You know what, Colorado wasn't perfect. Washington is far from perfect. The only way we're gonna get our regulations across the board put together is to look at what each of us are doing and move forward in that direction. And that's about all I got.
First of all, I just want to thank Aaron and the NCIA for throwing together this symposium. It's extremely important. I think one of the most critical areas that we're tackling right now in the marijuana industry moving forward is really around edibles and concentrates. You look at new states, you're seeing the articles come out that the kids are doing the dab, and there's a lot of fear and misperception out there that folks like Jordan, myself, and a lot of other policymakers in Colorado, Washington, and really any other regulated market that's moving out is continually up against. We don't have an easy road ahead of us, and just because legalization is happening at a greater pace does not mean we're through the woods yet. So I really appreciate you all being here to really get the concept of what's going on, because we're transitioning from sort of an old world mentality where we're going to go hire the best grower who makes the best yields, or the best baker or the best kitchen manufacturer out there that's been running things really along intuition and knowledge, and really coming at it from, well, I was in the black market, I knew a lot about growing weed, I knew a lot about creating edibles, and now I'm in a legitimate marketplace. And what we're seeing is this transition very quickly, even from those new states, into a new world where we can't run our businesses by intuition and good intentions. We really have to start running our businesses by strict regulatory compliance. One, it is the only way we're legally allowed to violate federal law, is by showing compliance with state law. And then the other piece to that is really being able to produce this consistent, quality, safe product that we need to deliver out to the marketplace to avoid folks from getting sick, or to ensure that every time they eat that milligram dosage, they're not getting 40% over-medicated or 40 or 50% under-medicated. FDA standards, it's a tolerance limit of about 10% on any prescription drug that's delivered to the marketplace. So how do we do that? It seems like a very daunting challenge, I think, for a lot of us to step up to the plate and do. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the importance of standard operating procedures. We do develop these, and this is an example of one that's probably a little bit old. It's probably been added to recently. They're thick documents. You're including all of your recipes in here on anything you produce. And then in Colorado, these are actually required by regulation for both infused product manufacturers as well as cultivators. So you actually have to outline everything you do, how you do it, all of the equipment on site, which does have to be UL or ETL listed for safety purposes. And you're subject to inspection on these SOPs at any time. So for us, it's certainly a GMPs. We've been talking about that a lot today. Good manufacturing practices, setting into place what you do best, and really adhering all of your employees to that particular procedure. Creates an accountability mechanism for owners and managers so that you guys can hold your folks accountable, not just to producing that edible every single time the way it should, within the tolerance limit of that potency, but also to compliance, which is then built into your operating procedures. So seed to sale is what we have here in Colorado. We track every gram of product, we track every plant that goes into the ground, and we really have to do that, required by law, into our standard operating procedures. So it's not a matter of running things by tuition anymore. It's now being process driven, and it's being procedure specific. So everyone out there that's looking to get into this game, or looking at what the trends might be in the future, one of the best practices you can do, whether or not you have 30 years of underground grow experience or manufacturing experience, is to really get a good set of best practices in place and document them into a standard operating procedure. It'll make things a lot easier for you as you hire new talent from the marketplace that has not had the experience that many of the people working in the industry currently do, to be able to train them a lot easier, posting things up right where they're supposed to. Other best practices, in Colorado we define like an immature plant as 8 inches or below. Put a ruler next to it, you put the SOP up right next to it, and it becomes dummy proof pretty quickly. So it'll lower any attrition that you might have already in the industry and help people feel a little bit more confident and comfortable in what their job set is. This extends even to onboarding procedures, whether or not you're training those folks. When it comes to concentrate manufacturing in Colorado, we're actually required to document training from a supervisor down to the lowest level employee who's running the extractor. And that has to be kept on file as part of their employee records. So where are we at in defining what that looks like at each of our organizations? And I think that there's a big lift here and a big challenge for folks to rein in the way we've normally done business and set it into place for the future. So these SOPs become like your living document, your Bible by which you run your business. And it's extremely important. especially in the concentrate manufacturing world. Jordan touched base on workplace safety, and he was responsible for really looking at, okay, we're going to use explosive gases in a machine to produce butane extracts or propane extracts. And what we were looking at is really making sure that those facilities are set up appropriately to do so and that we can do so safely. So we're not just subject to the Marijuana Enforcement Division regulating this, we're also subject to hazmat and fire procedures and protocols. In Denver, you have to have a bomb-proof room to make your extracts in. You have to be able to have detectors that detect any gas leaks or fire alarms if that were to happen, and fire suppression systems. So is that outlined in an emergency procedure? Do you have that covered in the event that your butane extractor springs a leak or a seal goes bad? Because we have seen fires and we've seen explosions. So it has been a real shift in the industry to look out for workplace safety. In terms of consistency and your quality of product, you're making a lot of investment, especially on the cultivation side, which is often tied directly to your manufacturing facility, in growing a plant for 6 months. If by the end of that 6-month period, 2 weeks before harvest, you get an attack of spider mites, because that never happens, right? And you have to apply pesticides. In Colorado, you could actually start failing your contaminant testing for that. And your entire batch of marijuana you just produced over the last 6 months has to be quarantined and destroyed. So you can imagine the amount of investment you're throwing into the labor, the time, effort, energy, chemicals, soil, water that goes to grow that plant, and at some point you have to destroy it. For edible manufacturers, that trickles down the line. Now you don't have in-sourced product you could use in your production of the actual manufacturing of concentrates or product. So getting down that consistency when it comes to cleanliness is another thing your standard operating procedures need to cover. Do you have daily, weekly, monthly cleaning schedules by which you can ensure that you're not getting spider mites or mold or powdery mildew on your plants? So these are considerations we think about in our world because you are subject to inspection by your regulators, and in any new market that's coming online, you're getting regulated. So naturally, you're going to have regulatory enforcement at some point. It's not a question of if, it's just a matter of when. Additionally, you're subject to inspection by OSHA. So you have to look out for workplace standards. Yes, the federal government has been into grows and facilities here in Colorado around workplace safety. So do your MSDS sheets cover chemical spills, pesticide application, proper chemical storage? Do you have all of the required PPE, is what we call it, personal protective equipment, respirators, gloves, masks, to be able to protect your employees? Because if they're applying certain chemicals for 10 years down the line, you're creating a whole new realm of liability around your workers' safety. Additionally, fire department, use of fire extinguishers, fire alarms, fire suppression systems, protocols for your extractions, especially around flammable solvents. Colorado, all of your SOPs actually have to be inspected by a physical engineer or an industrial hygienist who has to sign off stating that, yes, you can produce that extract safely. Additionally, you have the health department. Jordan did a good job of touching base on sort of the dangers of contamination. And we have had some scares here in Colorado. They found a hash extraction machine that was actually contaminated with E. coli, and they had to recall the products. When I sat on the edible safety work group for the state, that was one of the big reasons we had the metric seed-to-sale tracking system, is so we could determine what production batch contained what particular contaminant from what supply source, either trim or flour, that went into producing the concentrate or the edible. So I guess what I really want to emphasize is that there's a lot that's coming on the horizon, and a lot of trends, a lot of particulars, a lot of details to pay attention to. And if you can design your processes up front to be able to have procedures that are solid, that are based on best business practices, then we can get ahead of that eventual regulation. And that's the only way we can set industry-wide best practices by which we negotiate our future regulations and policies. So in conclusion, I think it's critical that we start looking at how do we standardize our internal systems, our businesses, and most importantly, our living documents, our standard operating procedures. Because without these elements in place, we are faulting in integrity in our businesses. And the real big picture is that the whole world's watching us. The only way that we can survive the FDA, the DEA, the federal government, is to really be solid in our core competencies, our practices. That takes laboratory testing. That takes best practices. That takes our standard operating procedures and putting that out there in the marketplace. We even have a huge governor's race here in Colorado where they're threatening to repeal Amendment 64. And I think one of the governor candidates is. So we're still in a contentious position. We're still a fragile industry. As we grow up, as we mature, this is sort of the next level of evolution where we have to take our businesses in order to maintain what we're doing and be able to grow it everywhere else we go. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you for your time.
I'm going to sit for my presentation. My name is Hillary Bricken. I'm a lawyer with the law firm of Harris Moray out of Seattle. I head up our regulated practices group, which happens to house our Canalaw group, which clearly, obviously, is focused on the marijuana industry in multiple states. The point of my presentation, if SOPs are the Bible, is that products liability is the Antichrist. And what I'd like to know in the room is how many lawyers are here today? Can you raise your hands? Okay, good. The remainder of you are normal people. This presentation will be for all of you, because one of the things I've been asked to speak about a lot lately are emerging areas in the marijuana industry, and one of them, unfortunately, is litigation. I'm sure some of the people in the room have had experience with civil litigation. It can be a very unpleasant experience, as it is both emotionally and financially draining. So what do you want to do as a business, especially as a startup? You want to insulate yourself from civil claims, including products liability. Now, how many people know what products liability is? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, good. We have an educated room. This will make for some good Q&A. Bear with me as I go through Products Liability 101. Essentially, with products liability, there are typically really 4 theories of liability, 4 causes of action. That's negligence, strict liability, breach of warranty, and then state consumer protection acts. Under those 4 theories of liability, there are really kind of 3 sub-theories of liability. The first one is manufacturing defects. What does that mean? It means shoddy workmanship. The product itself is defective. The second area is design defect. The product itself is inherently dangerous based on its design. And essentially, this means the product fails to satisfy consumer expectations. It also means that the risks of the product outweigh its benefits. The third one, and probably the most relevant one for the cannabis industry, is failure to warn, or faulty labeling or inadequate labeling. Essentially, under law, common law, faulty labeling really means the product has an inherently non-obvious dangerousness that would be mitigated through adequate warnings. Okay, so non-obvious dangers. Coming on the heels of the Maureen Dowd column, while that's more political, you can imagine that some users of marijuana don't always know the side effects or what happens when they mix marijuana with other substances, and this can be mitigated through labeling. Faulty labeling is going to be a huge emerging area with marijuana, mark my word. Now, regarding an exploration of each theory, really with negligence, what does this really mean? Negligence has a 4-part test, and this is very relevant because this is one of the most preventative areas in products liability. This is basically when you're careless. All businesses owe a duty to consumers, and what does consumers mean in that context? This is how severe products liability has gotten. It's not just to the person to whom you've sold the edible, or to whom you've sold the dried flower or the product. It's to any reasonably foreseeable plaintiff. This also means innocent bystanders, like kids, and frankly, in a crazy world, maybe even pets, depending on the jurisdiction in which you're in. Second, a breach. There's a breach in that duty. You didn't meet the standards set by the industry. You failed to abide by compliance. You made a dangerous product. Obviously, causation, plaintiff has to show the product harmed them in some way. And then lastly, this is very important for all businesses to remember, as it is a 4-part test. Plaintiff must meet all 4 elements. They got to show damages. If they've been hurt and there's no physical injury, there's no financial loss, no dice, which is very important when we talk about defenses to products liability, which I will get to at the end. There's also 2 more issues under negligence, which frankly, through case law, have been built up against businesses and manufacturers, essentially negligence per se, which is very important for this industry. What that means is if the plaintiff can show that the business has failed to comply with a relevant regulation, that they have already shown, by default, both duty and breach. and that's big time when we're going through the 4-part test. The second one is res ipsa loquitur, which is Latin. And what it means is the thing speaks for itself, which essentially means there's an inference of negligence in certain circumstances regarding control of the defendant and really any other extenuating circumstances around the product natural to that product. Now, I've only got about 5 minutes and I'm not going to drone on. What I really want to hammer in today's presentation is strict liability. It's a really vile tort. It's extremely hard to defend. The reason being you are guilty, essentially. There is no escape from strict liability whatsoever, very few defenses. And this isn't about the manufacturer's actions, it's about the product itself. Essentially, the manufacturer is liable if the product is dangerous, whether or not they are negligent when they make the product. Why is this the case? Because through the courts, public policy dictates that consumers have to be protected from low levels of industry-developed standards. So if you have an industry that says, look, standards of compliance are going to be really low and consumers are harmed, the courts got very irritated by the fact that big corporate America was allowed to get away with that. So strict liability is born. Now, to convince some of you how severe strict liability is, I just want to run through maybe 2 famous strict liability cases. Who remembers the McDonald's coffee case? Yes, okay. This is a landmark strict liability case. Essentially, a woman is burned by highly defective, highly hot coffee with severe 3rd-degree burns. A jury was also on her side. They awarded her $2.7 million in punitive damages, $200,000 in compensatory damages. Now, that's McDonald's. Not beyond the pale of reason that a jury could rule against big corporate marijuana. The other one is the Ford Pinto case. Anybody own a Ford Pinto in the 70s? Oh my gosh, shame on you. But we're lucky that you're here with us today. Again, cracking the mold on products liability. You have a big corporation like Ford, and this comes out in discovery. They did a cost-benefit analysis, and their brilliant attorneys and their accountants decided it would be more cost-effective to fight the lawsuits than to fix the defects. Now, who else does that sound like? GM, right. Okay, these people are going to pay majorly. In some ways, this particular type of liability borders on gross negligence and maybe even borders into criminal negligence, and they'll be held accountable probably by Congress. The last one is Vioxx. Anybody remember Vioxx? Okay, Merck was caught misleading the FDA about the safeness of Vioxx. The plaintiff at issue suffered a heart attack after taking Vioxx, and his family, he died. They were awarded $4.5 million in damages. And probably the last case is the exploding Coca-Cola bottle. Anybody remember that? Basically, we had a plaintiff. She was holding a Coca-Cola bottle. It was mispackaged, mislabeled. It exploded in her hand, gave her a 5-inch deep gash on her hand. She was awarded a few $1 million. So strict liability, obviously a very severe tort. There are not many defenses to it, that's for sure, and I'll get to those briefly. And really, the last 2 areas to cover, breach of warranty, essentially when you're making claims about the product during the transaction. This is expressed, it's implied, fitness for a particular purpose. If you're making medical claims about your products and they are not true, and or come to find out maybe many months down the line the customer finds out that your claims are not true, you are liable for that. And then lastly, the Consumer Protection Act in any given state, I looked up Colorado's last night, it has over 40 potential violations for business owners. And this essentially is that when a business engages in deceptive practices or unfair competition that hurts consumers, hurts the community, they can be held liable. And under Colorado's Act, there's even treble damages, which means take your damages, multiply them times 3. Now, to end on a high note, and I know I didn't explain warning label liability. If anybody has questions, please ask me. There is some very specific standards you can meet to protect yourself. Let's talk about defenses. Through the courts, of course, this is a very plaintiff-friendly tort. There's no end in sight unless your state has engaged in tort reform. Essentially, first of all, what you all need to realize is that the plaintiff has no duty to inspect the product, and their failure to do so is not a defense. So when you are going through your labeling and your packaging and your best practices and your SOPs, you need to remind yourself that you are dealing with a below average consumer, even if they're not. You need to make that job easy, that warnings, any dangers are patently obvious, Otherwise, you are not going to have the defenses that are available to you, albeit they are few. Contributory negligence, comparative negligence, the plaintiff misuses the product. Even that has limitations. Basically, that misuse has to be either unforeseeable or outrageous. This is a very high standard to try to take advantage of this defense. And then the last one is assumption of risk. Oh, the plaintiff did it. The stupid plaintiff used my dangerous product. That's not going to work unless the plaintiff actually knew about the defect, and that is an actual knowledge standard. It is not a should have known, it is an actually knows. So with latent defects, non-obvious dangerous side effects of the product, you are not going to have that defense available to you when it comes to a products liability plaintiff. This is not meant to scare anybody. This is not a conspiracy. Any business in this nation has had to deal with these issues, and marijuana is no longer immune, especially in an adult use market where you're going to have consumers of all types, of all competency levels, using your branded product. So in order to ensure your own financial well-being, to avoid a lawsuit, and to preserve your reputation, I highly recommend exploring products liability to ensure that your SOPs meet that standard. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to go for about 6 minutes on questions, and we'll wait for them to come up here. But I kind of want to start with the first question. I'll let you guys just kind of decide who's best to answer. So in your opinion, do you think that infused products are over-regulated, or do you think that there's just more detail in the regulations, more, best practice written in, where in other industries you're just responsible for following best practice instead of them putting it into legislation or regulation?
Yes, me on that one. On that one, I think that we're not over-regulated per se on some. We're just not equal. We need to be where we test the microbial counts, those things, the potency test. They need to be there. They truly do. That's how we protect the consumer. It's how we protect the industry we're bringing out. We need to be solid on how we do it from both a medical perspective and a recreational perspective, though.
This one's for you, too. If all your recipes need to be improved, do you have concerns about protecting your intellectual property?
And to be perfectly frank, we're just screwed on that one. We have the right, when we put it into our plan with how Washington is set up right now, they can go ahead and request that. It's in our operating plan. They can Freedom of Information Act and ask for it all the way down to how we do our extraction methods. And we do have issues with that. We've actually, we have lawyers. But it's one of those where right now, we would rather have followed the regulations and have our product on market and know that it's consistent than worry at this exact moment on where our IP is.
Okay. And Hillary, this one might be best for you. In regards to consumer safety, what regulations are in place from, and this is an assumption, the concentrated toxins coming from cultivations that use plant growth regulators or herbicides or fungicides or pesticides, which, that's a whole fun category too in itself.
What I didn't mention is that strict liability, this monster to all businesses of all sizes, it permeates everybody in the chain of distribution, the retailer, the manufacturer, the grower, even somebody who would, let's say it was extraction equipment that exploded, even somebody that leases that equipment can be liable. The state is setting the floor. This is not going to be the standard. Even though the state has mandated to all of you and in all of these new states that have come along to disclose pesticide usage, potency of the product, any type of toxins, any allergens that are in the products, that is not necessarily going to stop a plaintiff from pursuing you in the event that they get hurt or bystanders get hurt, where there are going to be non-obvious dangers contained in the product, and case law is going to define what else goes on that label. So as far as, are these regulations adequate to address that particular liability? The answer is no. Those regulations have nothing to do with your liability. In fact, who do they actually protect? The states. because the states have done their job at a minimum trying to protect consumers. And if you branch off of that, you have new product lines, and you fail to do this analysis for products liability every time, that is going to be on you. So I do not think that these regulations are adequate to protect against that level of liability.
This one is interesting, and it's fairly unique to California these days. This person owns an edibles company in California, and the state, there is no state regulation in California, so it's almost impossible to come out of the shadows and have insurance and payroll and worker protection and health department inspections. So what would the panel recommend? How do they best protect themselves as operators from liability?
I would say that you got to look at what the other states are doing. Just because the regulators haven't stepped into play yet, right? Because in California we can expect that that'll happen at some point. Getting ahead of the curve is really important. And if people look at sort of what the best practices are in the industry, take into account what we're learning today, just even regarding running HR like you would a normal HR department, even if you don't have a bank account to pay payroll through, or building SOPs, even though you've been doing it the same way for 20 years, is really important, because the more you can legitimize your business, the better off you're going to be to negotiate those future policies.
Well, this is actually my question. Going back to worker protection, which has always kind of been of special interest of mine. When we talk about reentry intervals and using pesticides that aren't appropriately labeled for the crop, how long does that liability last for an employer? When we have guys under lights, you might buy them $300 safety glasses, but every time you walk in that grow, they're propped up on their head. Yeah. So how do you kind of deal with that when we have nothing labeled?
I hate being the bearer of bad news. It really weighs on me after these things to kind of ring the bell on this stuff. I could do a whole panel on toxic torts and employers that have been busted for failure to really adhere to not only employee safety, but to disclose to their employees the dangers and the extent of those dangers in those environments. Asbestos cases. We hear them all the time, massive law firms taking on plaintiff's injuries claims. I don't know the specific statute of limitations on that particular type of claim, but I'm sure it would amount to personal injury. And there are all kinds of qualifications in the case law that if the plaintiff doesn't discover that they're sick until a certain date in the future, they may still be able to bring the claim. The issue there typically is causation. Plaintiffs have a really difficult time proving what actually has made them sick, but sometimes employers are not willing to take that risk, so big settlements are something that's really commonplace with toxic torts.
And is the insurance available to the industry good enough?
It depends on the insurer. I tell all my clients all the time, 420 insurance is a myth. If you find an insurer that's willing to underwrite your crop, please send them to me, because I would love to talk to them about what claims have looked like when they've played out. I could see most insurance companies saying, we will only reimburse you legal fees unless and until you are either settled the case or you are found by a court of competent jurisdiction to not have committed this particular tort.
Great. Well, it's funny because we've been talking about this stuff for years, and these rooms just keep growing and growing. So I think people are willing to take the risk, but we need the responsible operators. So it's great that everybody's here. So the final question, and I don't know who this is best for, is can you speak about the DEA reclassifying concentrates and extracts and how that may impact them moving to Schedule II? And that actually applies to flour as well. We talk about rescheduling, descheduling. Does the panel have an opinion on and where we should push the federal government to go on that?
Okay, I guess I'll talk about it. So there's a lot of different ways federal legalization could go forward, right? And then so this really becomes a question of which of those ways are best for the industry. There's my guess is what we'll see is something along the lines of what I'd like to see is something along the lines of the Cole memo almost put into law, where marijuana stays, illegally federally unless you do X, Y, and Z. I mean, that's kind of what the Cole memo has set up, where marijuana is still illegal federally, but we're going to let states go ahead, provided they check off all these boxes. And so, I mean, I think that you know, I just don't think the federal government's going to just wash their hands of the whole thing and be like, all right, marijuana is now legal. The states can do whatever they want. I have a feeling we'll probably see some intermediate steps. So, I mean, how that plays into scheduling and the FDA is really anybody's game. I mean, it just depends on how the law is changed and what the particulars that Congress decides to do at the time. But there's a lot of, I guess there's probably a lot of different variables within that, especially how it plays into the medical market. I mean, I think that's going to be incredibly interesting as we go forward, how the medical market moves on after the retail, after full legalization occurs. What do medical markets look like? What does medical look like in Colorado in 10 years? I mean, I don't think we even know, and we might be, along with Washington, a little bit ahead of the game on dealing with these quote-unquote dual markets existing side by side. But you know, how do you do that? I always say that everybody's like, well, once, you know, you do legalization, you don't need medical marijuana anymore. I vehemently disagree with that. I think that there are, quite frankly, there are products that should exist in a medical marketplace that have no business in a retail marketplace. So, you know, I think we're probably going to see a lot change. It just depends. I got a stop sign, but I'm going to throw out a quick pitch also. Vicente Cederberg is having an event at our office tonight. I know there's a networking fundraiser here. Ours will go after that. So if you want to come back, it's at 1244 Grant Street. It's a fundraiser for the Colorado House Majority Project, which helps elect Democrats to the Colorado General Assembly in our House of Representatives. So if anybody can make it out, money irregardless, we want bodies and faces and smiles more than anything. So we'd appreciate your support.